Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And this week, we're continuing Scary Parents Month, or as I'm probably going to say this at the start of every episode, Travis has coined the term...
Scarence.
You're going to live with that one. Scarence Month continues with The Stepfather from 1987. Before we do that, just some calls to action up front. We have a new premium subscriber on Patreon, loyal listener Hob. Hob, hello, I hope you're listening. Thank you so much for becoming a subscriber on Patreon. You have a ton of bonus material from the entire GenreVision network of shows to peruse. Tons of extended currently consumings, uncut episodes of Finflix, supplemental episodes for Third Time's the Charm, all of that for just $5 a month. So you're living the high life, Hob, and we are so happy to have you on board.
And if you want to live that high life too, just go to patreon.com/GenreVision, sign up there for $5 a month.
And the last call to action we want to have this week is, if you really love what we're doing here, one of the best ways you can help us out is to review the show on iTunes. Just a rating and a review. I think it's been a little while since we've gotten any reviews for the show, and man, I don't want to sound desperate here, but we could really use them.
Yes, they do quite a bit to actually help push podcasts up the rankings on iTunes, or it's Apple Podcasts. It's not going to be iTunes much longer. They're actually getting rid of the whole iTunes name later this year. So,
all right.
Yep, Apple Podcasts. You can review GenreVision, you can review Finflix, you can review Third Time's the Charm. Submitting a rating and a review for those is, again, a huge help. If you would take a few minutes and do that, that would be so nice. And we will definitely feature your review here on the show.
Well, let's continue Scary Parents Month with The Stepfather, the original from 1987, which spawned 2 sequels and a remake, but we're just talking about the original here. I should state that this was loosely based on a true account of a man named John List, who killed his family and then set up an identity and had started a brand new family, and then was eventually apprehended. It's not quite as dramatic as we see in The Stepfather, but The Stepfather, I think, has kind of been a little forgotten. I don't even think it classifies as a cult classic at this point. It's a pretty deep cut, I feel, and it's a little surprising to me because there are some notable names attached to this. Brian Garfield, who was the original author of Death Wish, and stars Terry O'Quinn, who most people might know from Lost and a whole bunch of character actor roles. The screenplay is credited to Donald Westlake, who was a very prolific writer, usually under the pen name Richard Stark, which probably his most notable creation under that name is the Parker series. So this movie has a little pedigree, and I think people might misconstrue it for a kind of Lifetime TV movie of the week type deal, which all those kind of came after The Stepfather. And The Stepfather, while it might kind of operate in that mold, I think it's way better than that kind of dismissive appraisal might lead you to believe.
People might see these kinds of movies through that Lifetime movie lens now, looking back. At the time, it probably would have seemed a little bit more like a slasher, just because that was sort of the flavor du jour. And really, it's neither. People are stabbed with knives in the movie, and there is sort of a Lifetime movie, lurid family thriller vibe going on, but really that doesn't capture what's going on in The Stepfather. The Stepfather is a suburban satire, certainly, an effective horror movie, but also I find it akin to movies like Halloween, in that the character is not a mystery. We know exactly what he is, and he's sort of elemental and mercurial.
Yeah, I think you had mentioned this when you were screening, because this is the first time you had seen it, and you were pretty kind of surprised, I think, in a good way, that the movie doesn't even pretend to have any mystery about it. I mean, the opening of The Stepfather, I would argue, is downright great. I think it is such a mission statement and a you're on or off the train kind of opening.
Right. Yeah. It openly states that Terry O'Quinn is the titular stepfather. He is a horrible murderer who will absolutely slaughter people, and he will change his identity and get away with it. That's basically what the opening states. We are introduced to Terry O'Quinn's character. He has a wig and a fake beard on and these big sort of 80s style glasses. He's going by the name Henry Morrison, although we don't know it at the time. He's staring into a bathroom mirror. There is blood everywhere. He's covered in it. He strips nude, gets into the shower. We see him change his appearance. He then leaves the house with a suitcase, gets on a Washington ferry, and as the ferry is crossing Puget Sound, it appears he just takes his suitcase and dumps it over the side of the boat. And that is the opening of the film. It is, it's like the ending of a much bleaker movie.
Well, and that's the thing. I think you're underselling just how horrifying this opening is, because when we're introduced, the first couple shots are him in the bathroom and he's got some blood on him. And as he, I think he dyes his hair a bit and he shaves and changes his appearance and everything, puts contact lenses in. We then see him walking through this house and we're like, okay, what's going on? We start to see little hints of, okay, there has clearly been something horrible that's happened. But the big reveal in which he's coming down the stairs and the camera is pulling out and we see a bloody handprint on the side of the wall, and then the reveal of the carnage of the entire family and just blood everywhere. The reveal is so perfect because it stings just because it's horrific. The music hits, and in that moment, the stepfather walks over and picks up an overturned chair and kind of dusts it off. And immediately, we know who this character is.
Well, maybe we don't know exactly who he is, but we're given this little indication of who this character could be and sort of what drives him. It's this mysterious little behavior, again, sort of like that Michael Myers head tilt. It's just sort of ambiguous enough that you're going, huh? It really sort of brings you in. And then when he walks outside and there's this big crane shot that reveals the suburbs before him, that the crane shot, the camera pulling back and revealing the street and all these other houses, you're thinking, fuck, this guy's going to go anywhere.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, it's the ending to another movie. I liken this, and when you talk about there being no mystery, I liken this to the famous Hitchcock adage about show a bomb under the seat of somebody sitting in a theater and show that nobody in the theater knows the bomb is there, and you've immediately baked in tension to the audience. That is the opening of this movie. It's like, we know who the stepfather is. We know he's a murderer. And as soon as we end this opening sequence and start up with him being a part of a new family, we already are on edge from the word go.
Sure. It's 1 year later after the opening. He's with a new family. He's with a woman named Susan, and he is trying to win over Susan's daughter. He and Susan have gotten married. It was a very quick courtship and marriage. And Stephanie, Susan's daughter, just isn't buying it. Not only does Stephanie just get the heebie-jeebies from this guy, and of course for good reason, Stephanie is troubled. We find out later that although she is on summer break when the film initially starts, she's having some trouble at school, basically.
Well, yes, I think it's, it's not just that Jerry, as he's now known, Jerry Blake, Terry O'Quinn's character, is not just coming into a separated family, that the father has died within whatever the past year or so. So there is still this mourning that is going on, and he is pretty numb to that. That is getting in the way of what he clearly wants, which is this idyllic, perfect family experience. And like you said, we see him trying to warm up to her. He's driving her to school and he's saying stuff, it's like, it would mean a lot to your mother if you could get along better in school this year. And immediately cut to her in the middle of a fight with another girl. That's such a smart, funny, effective cut.
Yeah, well, I mean, the editing in the film and the writing in the film are such in perfect harmony that it drives the story forward at a pretty great pace, even when the movie is taking its time and letting scenes breathe as it needs to. He also does things like he buys her a cute dog, and just the act of Jerry buying Stephanie this dog, you think, that poor fucking dog is going to bite. But it seems like a cruel act because we already know that Jerry is a very, very bad person, and that Stephanie is particularly vulnerable, and the dog is adorable. So we think, this son of a bitch is going to kill that dog.
Chekhov's dog.
Yep.
So I think if you just started the movie with kind of excluding the opening scene and just having Jerry there, I think the movie wouldn't work as well. I think you need that gut punch opening, which is genuinely horrific. I mean, the reveal of the carnage is horrible, but then just to add salt in the wound, when Jerry leaves, camera pans down and you see a dead child.
Yeah, it's just really nasty. It's actually the grossest gags in the movie.
Yeah, and it's not, we never see the act of the violence happening. It's all the aftermath. But having that opening makes everything he does in this first act with his new family, everything feels insidious and twisted. But it's not. I mean, we have to talk about just Jerry as a character and Terry O'Quinn's performance of him. Jerry, or whoever he is, I love that we never know what his real name is.
Mm-hmm. He's the fucking Terminator for all we know.
I mean, I you might hate this comparison, but I kind of equate Jerry a little bit to something like Heath Ledger's Joker.
Sure, and that he has no discernible actual human background.
Right. We don't know who he is, and yet he is basically an idea made flesh. Mm-hmm. And it's a twisted, dark, scary, violent idea. And Jerry, as we continue throughout the movie and we see it's like he makes so many speeches about family being important to him, the most important thing being family. We get a sense of his belief structure. Like I love when Stephanie gets expelled from school and they're having a chat at the dinner table and they reveal this. Jerry says very point blank, matter of factly, girls don't get expelled.
Yeah, I like his sort of creepy reinforcement of gender roles. It really speaks to the sort of core of his character. And Stephanie, even though she's getting in fights and getting expelled, one of the cool things about this is a final girl who is already in therapy. We think about, we make jokes about things like, oh, this poor girl at the end of this movie is going to need so much therapy. At the beginning of the movie, Stephanie's already in therapy. She's in grief therapy for, her father passing away and to try and pull her grades out of the toilet and try and get her from getting expelled. Unfortunately, that doesn't work. And when she speaks to her therapist, she blames all her problems on Jerry. And what I like about this movie and having Stephanie in therapy is that she actually has a pretty good relationship with her therapist.
Yeah, you would think kind of stock character in this role would be a symbol of oppression from some kind of authority figure.
And it's a man as well, so that doesn't help. Yeah.
But I think that would be kind of the thing, which is why later in the movie when she's going to have to see another therapist and she sees it's this very stodgy woman, she ducks out. I love that. It's funny.
Yeah, she's going to go see Dr. A. Andra.
Yes. But yeah, the relationship that Stephanie has with her therapist, it feels very human. It's a good, and from a writing perspective, it's a good way to excuse pure dialogue as exposition and character building while still feeling effective and appropriate.
Yeah, there's an idea, once Stephanie gets expelled, she's like, well, I'd like to go to boarding school. And really what she's saying is, I want to get the fuck away from Jerry because he's awful. Mm-hmm. And she's right.
And of course, Jerry is like, no, it's not a home without children.
Mm-hmm. Why would you want to break up the family, Pumpkin?
Yeah, and see... let's be up on Front Street on this. Terry O'Quinn, this was, I think, the movie that kind of made him arrive in a lot of people's eyes. Like, I don't know anything that he did before this, and I don't think he had a huge prominence doing anything before this. Terry O'Quinn as Scary Jerry in The Stepfather, it is a performance for the books. We kind of came across the same thing last week talking about Serial Mom, and how that's got to be one of Kathleen Turner's best roles. The Stepfather is undeniably one of, if not, Terry O'Quinn's best role.
Yeah, there's no question. This is Terry O'Quinn's finest hour. He's just so incredible in the movie. And it's amazing to see a really great actor making the best of a good script, and all of the technique in the filmmaking is there to support that performance. Like, the lighting and the cinematography in the film are really good. And not in a way that's like super flashy. Like, occasionally there are little flourishes and things like that. But there's a scene where he's in the basement where Stephanie actually gets a look behind the mask at like who this person really is for the first time. And he is able to, have his face sort of half bathed in shadow in a way that isn't like overtly artsy.
No, it doesn't look like a, daguerreotype etching or something like that.
Right. It feels organic to the environment that the scene takes place in. But the way he delivers those lines and the way that he sort of is able to snap back into that mask, into that facade is like, God damn, like, he is making the best of the script. The script is well written, and then everything, all the filmmaking rises to meet his performance and enhance it to make it the optimum performance. It's just so good.
It's pretty astonishing. I mean, for something that I think, if you want to see how this can be easily mishandled, people should watch the Stepfather remake from 2009, because all of these things are missing. And the foundation is still there, but it's so clear how once you chip away all these little things, it ends up really hacking into what makes this work. And there's just so much. I mean, we should say this is directed by Joseph Rubin, and his DP was John Lindley. And they make this movie way more handsome than its means should probably allow it to be.
Yeah, it is not a Hollywood-looking picture. I believe it was all shot, or at least most of it was shot in the Washington suburbs.
That in Canada.
So it has a distinctly Pacific Northwest look to it. Like, there are scenes that they shot on those Washington ferries that were done for real.
Yeah, and I think that adds to, I mean, you have to do it in that area to really get the sense of suburbia and this postcard perfect town and people and everything. And talking about the script, I just and I don't know how much of this is in the script and how much of it is improv by O'Quinn, but the moments where when he first is down the basement, it's the first time we see him freak out.
Mm-hmm.
He is got his little workshop down there, and he's smashing a bunch of stuff, hammering on the table, and he has lines like, "A little order around here, that's what we need." I love lines like that, and there's moments where you can't even hear what he's saying, where he's just muttering to himself.
It's like he's channeling some sort of elder demon of rage. It's just awful. The whole reason that he has this sort of freak out is that he is hosting a backyard barbecue, and he's bullshitting with a few of the guys from the neighborhood, and they're passing around the newspaper. And Jerry catches that they're still writing about the crime that he committed a year ago. And he thought for sure that it would be swept under the rug at this point and that nobody would be talking about it. So he leaves his party to have this freaking rage off in the basement.
And it's great because we never get an origin story for Jerry, but these little moments where he's muttering to himself or saying these lines that he's repeated, it feels like, oh, was that something his father would say to him? And that's what instilled this insanity in him for a specific kind of family unit. But none of this is ever stated. It feels so organic and real in a movie that is balancing being horror and satire and certainly, I think, over the top in moments. But O'Quinn is the kind of performer that sells you on it all, because he can do big and crazy and scary, but he's also an actor who doesn't have to say a word, and with just his eyes, you can see everything that's going on in his brain.
Well, he has these little mannerisms and micro expressions, like his tongue darting out and things like that, like little things that aren't hamming or mugging for the camera. But when he does that, you're like, God damn, there's just so much performance oozing out of this guy in this moment. And it feels organic. It doesn't feel like he's some mugging wacko villain. He's not, what is it? Silent Night, Deadly Night 2. It's garbage day or whatever that guy is.
Right. No, he feel as heightened as the movie might be, and it certainly is with its satirical elements. Jerry never feels like a comic book villain. Like he feels like somebody that could exist, and I credit that so much to O'Quinn, because he can do something and just change how much of his eyes he decides to expose, and not in a comedic, like, silent film actor way. It will be subtle, millimeters of change in how open his eyes are. And he just communicates, like, all of a sudden his rage is there, his vacancy. It is really a bravura performance. And like we said, I think there's so much of the filmmaking that amplifies that. There's a shot later in the movie where Jerry is walking away from a murder on this dark street. And it's this crane shot of him, and it's just beautiful dark shadows. And then from that scene, they cut to a garage opening, and the camera starts at the bottom and follows the door up to reveal Jerry standing there, and it ends with an extreme close-up of his face. And it's like, this is creating an iconic movie villain.
Yeah, and it knows exactly how to do it given the pieces that it has. It's just a really masterfully made performance in a movie that, at this point, I think you and I have no qualms about saying is very, very good. Like, I really do think it's one of the best films that you and I have watched for the show so far this year.
Yeah, I mean, I was excited since this was your first time seeing it. I've seen this a couple times before, but this was definitely because in previous viewings, I've always just been like, it's Terry O'Quinn, it's his performance. His performance makes the movie. But this was really the time where I started to pay attention to the filmmaking and how this has got to be one of the better showcases of, okay, we're clearly working on a lower budget. How do we make the best out of what we can do? And this really feels like a lot of straw into gold.
Yeah, well, I mean, it makes you actually take into consideration what makes a good performance. It's not just one performer doing the best that they can. It actually has to be the orchestra working in concert.
Exactly.
To support that performance. That's what good acting is, at least as it is apparent to the audience. You can't just have a shoddily made movie and then one performer shines above the rest. There has to be elements that support that performance to let it shine. An actor can't carry a movie. And it's not Terry O'Quinn's job to carry this entire movie on his own. As a matter of fact, Stephanie is definitely his sort of equal in the story when it comes to performance. I think Jill Sholin, who plays Stephanie, is more than capable of carrying this movie as like a two-hander, basically.
Yeah, I think she is incredibly sympathetic, and obviously as the audience we're many steps ahead of her, but from the get-go, her just not feeling something right with Jerry is like, okay, like we know you should absolutely feel that way. And I think if we were going to have one complaint that we both share, there is an element to this movie that I kind of wish was completely excised from the movie, and that is this brother character who is the brother of the woman who was murdered in the opening sequence. And we keep cutting back to him trying to investigate and get the word out about this guy and try and find him. And it feels tacked on like a studio note or something, because it really feels completely disconnected to the real crux of the story.
Well, I think that's easy to say in hindsight, knowing eventually what happens to his character. But throughout the movie, I was wondering, okay, where are they going with this, and how is it eventually going to intersect with what's going on at home with Jerry and Susan and Stephanie? It eventually does intersect, but his character, the movie knows that he's not the important one. He's just this remnant of what Jerry has left behind from that previous set of murders. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that sort of structure and that choice of letting the murderer out of the box in the very first scene and Stephanie's suspicion of it. One of the reasons I think it's the best choice for this kind of movie is that the movie is called The Stepfather. This movie would have been marketed with Terry O'Quinn as the obvious villain. even if that sequence hadn't opened the movie and they had made us wait for some sort of reveal, the movie to sort of play at some sort of mystery would have been a fool's errand. It would have been a stupid idea because everybody in the audience would have known, well, clearly the guy is evil.
Right. It would have to be some really bland, like Home Sweet Home or Home is Where the Heart Is or something like that, and play it off as some kind of mystery, as like what's going on.
Right. But if you come up with a title like The Stepfather, that idea is way more high concept and easily graspable for audiences.
Right. A lot of people have had stepfathers or experiences with that, and it immediately injects an idea into your brain.
Right.
Of okay, what is this and why is this scary? And I think, like I said at the beginning, I think that's what kind of makes the movie sing out the gate, is like, okay, we know this guy is an absolute monster. And I like that the movie, I don't think it ever feels any sympathy for Jerry. He is an outright monster.
They do imply, in the things that he says when he freaks out, that bad parents can create bad parents, or bad parents can create monsters. That's implied in the text of the film. It's certainly not subtextual. It's
possible, because when I talk about him being reminding me somewhat of Heath Ledger's Joker, there's these little hints that Jerry will talk about, like, oh, you could say I had a rough upbringing or something like that. And we never know.
You must have had a strict parents. And he goes, you could say that.
Yeah, it's little things like that. And it's like, I just think about the Joker's multiple origin stories that he tells, how you can't believe anything he says. And Jerry feels a lot like that, where it's like, maybe I don't want to know. I don't want to, have some doctor open up a file and say, like, he was tied to a radiator when he was 6. Like that kind of stuff.
Right. I wouldn't want that reveal at the end of his name is Harold Marston.
Right.
And he came from Tulsa, Oklahoma or whatever. It doesn't matter. It doesn't actually make the story any more effective. In fact, it's way scarier that he remains this sort of bland crash test dummy of a person in some ways.
Well, that he remains the stepfather.
Right. Yeah. That elemental sort of aspect to his character. Even, when he's talking with Susan and actually having a rather believable, intimate moment with her early on in the film, they're having a very organic conversation, I felt. And he says something that comes off as romantic, but we know to be absolutely true. He says, I didn't even exist until I met you.
Which, like you're saying, yeah, it sounds super romantic and like a cheesy line, but in his warped brain, he didn't. Jerry Blake didn't exist. It's incredible little stuff, and something that we have touched on, but I think is a broader read of the movie and is an important read of the movie, is the stepfather as satire, because this is a horror movie, but it is directly satirizing this kind of, I think at the time, the Reagan nuclear family. But this idea of the perfect, wholesome American couple. And we also explored some of that in last week's episode with Serial Mom. That was certainly the outright comedic riff on that. This is the really dark, really scary satire of that idea.
Yeah, there are scenes in The Stepfather that rather directly echo some things in Serial Mom, or vice versa. The scene where the parents are having sex and we cut to the kids trying not to hear it, but being sort of horrified. There is a scene where right after Jerry says, I didn't even exist till I met you, they're getting it on. And we cut to Stephanie and she's like, really bummed out. I think she's listening to Pat Benatar.
And she's like reading The Outsiders.
She's reading The Outsiders, which is really funny. Like that's a really funny addition, and it's clearly done intentionally. This movie definitely has a wit about it that I admire, but it uses most of that wit for satirical purposes to say that this idea of the Reagan era nuclear family in suburbia is bullshit. It's a lie. It's something that people pursue, but it's not really based on any sort of truth. It's arbitrary and maybe unattainable.
And it's not who they are. It's who they want to be, but who they want to be is an impossible mandate.
Right.
Which again is in Serial Mom to a comedic extent. This is a much darker riff on it. And I don't think it's by accident that Jerry's profession is real estate. He sells houses. He outright says it at a speech during a barbecue. Like, I like to think that I'm not just selling you houses, that I'm selling the American dream.
Well, and who does he invite to the barbecue? He invites all the neighbors that he actually sold houses to in his neighborhood. He's not just trying to curate the perfect family. He's trying to curate the perfect suburbs around him. He really wants to be the center of this community that he curates for himself, that he is the mastermind of.
And it's so disturbing. And when things start to break, and man, I love when they break, is Stephanie's psychiatrist starts to have a hint at something wrong. Something's up with Jerry, wants to check him out. So he goes to see a house that Jerry's showing under a fake name and try and suss him out. This sequence is so good. It's one of my favorites.
Oh yeah, the little psychological cat and mouse game that they play while walking around this house is so great. This guy, this therapist, Dr. Bondurant, is the sort of personification of progressive ideas in the film. Bondurant is this quote unquote confirmed bachelor that, as he's talking about, basically constructing a fake identity to introduce himself to Jerry. And he has trouble keeping his fake identity straight, which ultimately gives him away.
Yeah, and he directly and purposely challenges Jerry's idea, because Jerry's like, "Oh, do you have a family?" And he's like, "No, confirmed bachelor." And he confronts Jerry's ideas. He's like, family values, all that crap. And God, O'Quinn's so good, because O'Quinn doesn't have to put on like a dirty scowl. You can just see behind his eyes, like, I fucking hate this guy.
Right. Yeah. Other films would have done, a zoom in and, watch the narrowing of the eyes and stuff like that, or a little music cue. But the little subtle look Jerry gives him, you can just see that switch flip behind his eyes. And, this motherfucker is holding it all in. Like, he just wants to kill Dr. Bondurant in that moment.
Well, when they're playing this cat and mouse and Jerry finally figures it out and he turns around, and again, you sent me that screenshot of the lighting on his face when he's like, "Are you interested in this house or me?" And it's so effectively creepy. And then he, beats his head in with a 2x4. And the movie, like you're saying, it's not flashy, but it knows when it has a shot on its hands.
Yeah, well, as Jerry stands over the broken, crumpled body of Dr. Bondurant, they're standing in front of French doors, so there's the light is shining through the lattice. And earlier on in the scene, I had wondered why they had filled that room with so much fog. Like, you can definitely see that the air in the room is thick with fog or smoke. And then when you see the light streaming through the French doors, at this, lighting this tableau of Jerry standing over the dead body of Bondurant, you're like, God damn, this is good.
And the movie's funny. And this is, I think, a tightrope walk that is near impossible to pull off. And I think maybe 1% of movies does it, and The Stepfather's one of them. This is a movie that I can't call it a horror comedy, but it is really funny and really scary, sometimes in the same breath.
Sure, like American Werewolf.
Yeah, it's really on that level. And there's little funny moments, like when Jerry is disposing of Dr. Bondurant's body by, getting him in a car and pushing him off a cliff. He puts him in and he just goes, "Buckle up for safety."
Yeah. There's so many great little one-liners in this movie. But again, it's not hammy.
No, it never feels like a pie in the face,
Right. He doesn't have any groaners.
Right, exactly. And there's plenty of moments like that. I mean, there's so many lines. And then later, we've started to see Stephanie have a relationship with this boyfriend. They go on little scooter rides and stuff. And they start to have an innocent goodnight kiss. And Jerry comes out and breaks it up. And he's, saying like, "This guy was raping our daughter right here on the front porch." And Shelley Hack, who we haven't talked about, Shelley Hack's really good as Susan in this.
Of course, yeah. She doesn't have as large a role or have as much screen time as Jerry or Stephanie, but she's great in the role.
Well, and I think this is a movie, I was talking about it with somebody on Twitter that had a memory, and I think even though this is written and directed by men and everything, and I think one of the reasons it has this kind of Lifetime movie stigma is that The Stepfather is exploring female fear, and not in a titillating slasher final girl way that's really kind of about a lot of male gaze and male fantasy. This is really about being afraid of a strange man entering your life.
Yes, and it's also about trust in men. We trust men that we invite into our home to not be monsters. And the violation of that trust is horrifying on multiple levels, because Jerry is very clearly a monster who can rule the house with an iron fist. That violation of trust is just as violent an act in a lot of ways as the other things Jerry does.
But I love this moment with the boyfriend, because it's the first time that Susan challenges Jerry. She is pretty submissive to him in this kind of antiquated gender role setup that they have. This is the first time she really steps up to him and says, like, I've known her boyfriend longer than I've known you.
Mm-hmm.
And I trust there's nothing going on here. And when that happens, there is a shot of Jerry standing outside and his eyes go wide, and it is with no lines. It's like the wall has fallen. He knows this life isn't going to work, and it's all communicated completely silently.
Yep. It's at that point that he starts to, start packing his bags and abandoning ship. Regarding the mom, Susan, it would be really easy in this movie for us to hate Susan for being an oblivious character. But she's not really played as oblivious. There's not things playing out in front of her very eyes that we should be going, you dumb idiot, can't you see this happening right in front of your face? The movie doesn't play anything like that. As a matter of fact, Susan gets quite a few sympathetic moments. Early on, there's one scene between Susan and Stephanie where they're actually sharing a moment together, acknowledging one another's grief and the need to try to pick up and move on, regarding the death of Susan's husband and Stephanie's father. And it's a genuinely heartfelt moment between the two of them that they share by themselves. It lets you know, like, just how invested Susan is in wanting to build something that feels normal again. I get that. It's attractive. And the interactions that Susan has with Jerry behind closed doors do seem to foster some sort of organic affection. Like that scene we talked about where they're talking about before they bone down. It's like, this seems like real banter.
It's also very clear that Jerry is extremely good at manipulating people's perception of him.
Yes.
In that scene, before they start making out and everything, he's watching Mr. Ed on TV, which is, again, reinforcing his kind of corny, antiquated thing. He says, like, I used to watch this all the time as a kid, and I didn't know horses couldn't talk until I was in high school or something. And
it feels like a believable detail.
Well, and Susan says, like, you never really talk about when you were a kid. I would love to see a picture of you. And Jerry is immediately able to, like, that's when he deflects and is like, I don't really have any pictures and I didn't exist until you. It's like, this is how he prevents his identity from getting out.
He's able to deflect in really masterful ways.
It's so sinister in very real ways, in the ways that people manipulate others, especially when they're in romantic relationships.
Stephanie's breakdown at the death of her therapist is the kind of work we almost never see in 80s horror films. Popular 80s horror films from North America, I should say. Her breakdown is legitimately sad.
It's genuine. It's earned. Like, the emotions don't feel like pure melodrama. This feels like an earned dramatic moment.
Well, and this therapist she actually found to be relatively empowering. Like, when she's talking about wanting to go away to boarding school because of Jerry, she just goes, I feel like I would just be running away from the problem. And he looks at her very earnestly and goes, what's wrong with running away?
And it's tender.
Well, he presents to her this idea that there can be a way out. Like, you're going to be an adult soon enough. She's 16 in the movie. This doesn't have to be this way forever. And he actually makes her feel like she can have some control over her life. And when he dies, you know, that sort of light goes out and she's genuinely crushed.
Well, and what I like about that scene is we're allowed to have that emotional moment.
Yeah.
And it totally works. But it's not just that. There is plot momentum going on because that's when she sees the note that Dr. Bondurant was going to meet Jerry at that house.
Yeah, when she goes to see the other therapist, Dr. A. Andra, who also took care of Neil Breen in Fateful Findings, she peeks her head into this other therapist's office and sees this very stern-looking woman and goes, no. And instead she goes into Dr. Bondurant's office, which is right next door, and she sees the note on his calendar that says, you know, there's a meeting with Jerry. And she said, oh, shit. She puts that 2 and 2 together and said, uh-oh. And things fall apart pretty quickly from this point forward.
The last 15, 20 minutes of this movie, I like, again, it's not a typical, like, okay, every 15 minutes or whatever, we got to have this or that. It really builds to this last little climax because Jerry comes back and Susan has been informed, like she tried to call him up at work and they're like, he doesn't work here anymore. And she's like, what? So Jerry comes by and she's like, I called your work. And because he says like, yeah, I was at the office. I was showing somebody's house. And he's already been, you know, crossed the ferry again and trying to find and cement himself into a new family. He's starting to.
We see him applying for a new job somewhere else, you know, that he's gone to in Washington or Oregon or whatever.
Well, yeah, it's an insurance job. And he's like, I specifically focus on family insurance. And so he has to have that element in his life. So he's already starting to try and make a new family. And when he comes back and, you know, Susan confronts him and is like, your office said you didn't work there. And Jerry's kind of shoving it off like, oh, that new girl, I'll tell you, I'm going to call her up and she's in trouble. She must have said something wrong. And she's like, well, I asked for you by name and they didn't know. And he's like, how could they forget it? It's Hodgkins. And then Susan's like, what did you say? And this is the moment that I think cements the stepfather as an amazing horror villain. The shot is a low enough angle looking up at Terry O'Quinn and the realization in his face of, wait a minute, I have said the wrong thing. And he delivers the line, who am I here? That is so chilling.
Yeah, and he says it practically smiling too. I mean, it is really bone chilling.
Well, and Susan, when he goes, wait a minute, who am I here? And Susan goes, Jerry. And he goes, Jerry Blake. That's right. Thank you, dear. And he turns and clocks her with the phone. That hits so hard that I've seen this movie multiple times. And on this viewing, I jumped.
Oh yeah. It's a legitimately scary moment. The movie then engages in one bit of unexpected sleaze. Stephanie has a naked scene where she gets into the shower and it's kind of out of nowhere and you don't really get any indication that this is the kind of movie that you're going to watch. It's not some sort of TNA movie like you normally get. As a matter of fact, in the very first scene in the movie, Terry O'Quinn gets nude himself and gets into a shower. Well, so when you see Stephanie strip nude and get in the shower, you're like, what the fuck? Why are we having like a teen nude shower scene here? I don't get it.
I wish they had shot that scene without the nudity because I understand because she's in the shower when her mom gets knocked out and Jerry is stalking up the stairs to go kill her. It's like, okay, we are making a direct connection to Psycho.
Yes.
And I even, before we started recording, it's like, yeah, the stepfather, the character of the stepfather is like Norman Bates meets Norman Rockwell. And it's like, okay, I get that. But because it just feels so like the camera is like high up and just, it's weird. It's really weird. And I wish it wasn't in the movie.
Actually, the shower scene from Freddy vs. Jason is oddly enough shot in a really similar way. It's not like I mind nudity. Certainly don't mind nudity in film, but
it feels out of left field for the movie that we've been watching.
Yeah, for especially like right in the third act when things are supposed to be sort of culminating, narratively speaking. For that little diversion to happen, I was like, what? So Terry O'Quinn then starts to break down the bathroom door, and luckily the nude shower stuff is done at that moment. But I am surprised Terry O'Quinn did not hurt himself very badly doing this movie.
Oh my God.
He pounds his fists on things so hard during this movie. And on the inside of that bathroom door is a mirror. So not only does he break through the door, he then busts through the mirror. And we see this shot from inside the bathroom. And that shot of him smashing through the door mirror and walking through is like, holy fuck, this guy is a monster. It is so great.
It's so great because Terry O'Quinn, we see him, he is not a behemoth or you know, some terrifying, imposing figure.
It's not Kane Hodder, you know?
No, he looks like Norman Bates. He is this scrawny, kind of dorky guy. So when he enacts this rage and violence in the finale, and I mean, there's so many things that, like when he's pounding on the door with the handle of a knife, and we see the indentations in the door from how hard he's hitting. It's like, oh my gosh, this is it. This was the rage that was hinted at by seeing the aftermath of the violence in the opening. There is true horrifying power in this man, and O'Quinn fucking sells it. I think earlier I missed my one kind of, this is the showiest shot I think in the movie, but it's a fun one, is they do like a dolly in to his face and he squints and he says, "You've been a very bad girl."
Oh yeah. And again, it's not groan worthy. It's definitely a one-liner, but it fits with the text of the movie pretty seamlessly.
It's great. I mean, it's the most kind of Sam Raimi the movie ever gets.
Sure, it's not a really, really kinetic movie until that point.
Yeah, but it is a moment of like, oh, it's the equivalent visually of, we want you to lean in because the shit is happening. So yes, the image of him exploding through that mirror in the door is just a total nightmare of greatness. And then we have a cat and mouse sequence, which I'm not crazy about that usually in certain movies, but I like that they go up to the attic, which I don't think we've been in the whole movie.
I believe that's true, yeah.
So it feels like this totally new alien space. It gives them more chances to shoot some light through, you know, boarded up windows and stuff, so it looks really great. I love the moment of Jerry is stalking her. Of course, he's saying creepy things like, you know, come out, wherever you are, ollie, ollie, oxen free. And then when he finds her and he's stalking up to her, he falls through some like asbestos.
He just falls through the drywall in the ceiling and just
yeah, and falls down. We should state earlier, detective brother man showed up, and
yeah, Ogilvy.
Yes, Jerry kills him immediately. He does have a funny line over his corpse. He's like, "Next time you're going to stop by, remember to call." It's the amazing deftness of this movie to be that funny while not robbing it of its terrifying, oppressive tone. That's some masterful shit.
Yeah, it feels like in those moments that it could take you out of the movie with those one-liners, like the movie was pausing to wink at you, but I never ever got that sense. His performance is just that engrossing. It
feels that natural. It feels like that is what that character would do in that moment. It doesn't feel like a punch-up joke or anything.
Right, exactly. It's not like Hellboy 2019 where every time they needed a punch-up joke, they would cut away from the character and then just add a line in ADR later on in post-production.
Yuck.
Yikes.
But then eventually this does end because the whole reason Detective Brother Ogilvy was there was basically to get a gun in the house, because he steps in and is just immediately stabbed.
Hardcore too. My God, that stabbing right in the gut over and over again. It's like, ooh,
yeah,
God.
It's nasty. But then that allows Susan to grab the gun and shoot Jerry a couple times when he's up on the stairs. And then Stephanie takes the knife from him and plunges it into his chest. And this is the one moment where I think the movie shows sympathy for its monster with his final line.
I don't know if I would describe it as sympathy, but
it's chilling and it's sad. Like
it's chilling and sad and creepy and really loaded.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
He's really so invested in all of this as this delusional weirdo. And he looks right at Stephanie as he's got this knife in his chest and he's bleeding and he says, "I love you." And he falls down the fucking stairs.
I mean, Terry O'Quinn's performance, it's like it's like he's saying I love you, and his I love you is his death rattle. Like, it's just, it's so good. And then the movie ends. Like, the movie gets out. Well, no, not that's not true. Earlier and throughout the movie, we've seen Jerry likes to make he's making a little bird house, which he then erects out in the front yard.
And it looks exactly like their house.
Exactly. And he had Susan and Stephanie help him put it up. So the ending is Susan and Stephanie cutting down the birdhouse, and the final shot is the birdhouse close up in the foreground with Susan and Stephanie walking back into their house in the background. So if you didn't get the thematics of the movie, there it is. I'm not saying that to be dismissive of the ending. I think it's it makes its statement very pointed.
Right. It's talking about this suburban lifestyle basically being a sham.
Yeah, being a fake thing. But man, as we said, The Stepfather is very, very good. But what does it teach us about scary parents as a theme, as something in film?
Well, considering that the perspective character is Jerry and Stephanie, really. I mean, it's like I said, it's a two-hander. We spend probably equal time through their eyes in the film. When looking at it through Stephanie's perspective, I think it's clearly about the idea of the sanctity of a family unit, the idea of identifying an interloper, and that fear of somebody who is not your kind or not your tribe, and the ability to invest in that person as someone you have to trust. That fear, that lack of control you have as a kid, if your parents get divorced and then some new significant other moves in to your life, you have no choice in the matter. Of course, you didn't choose to be born to your original parents as is, but the fact that you can just sort of have a new life and a new family dynamic established around you and you have no say in the matter as a young child is an incredibly traumatic thing. And I think one that our generation as millennials can relate to quite heavily. 50% of our parents divorced.
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea and calling something the stepfather. Like I said, it puts an idea in your mind of, okay, this is something that is alien.
An intruder.
Yeah, exactly. It's that simple of an idea. And you're right in that Jerry is a strong perspective character. This is a movie where we are in the villain's shoes the majority of the time. Like you're saying, it is a two-hander. Like, Stephanie is absolutely a perspective character, but the movie starts with Jerry and, it stays with him. It's very rare that we're not experiencing whatever the story is, from his perspective. And for Jerry, I think this is in a weird way, a very good pairing for Serial Mom, because it is about a lot of the same things, about the unattainable nature of this perfect American dream ideal that is a total lie that you have been sold, over the years through stuff like television, like Mr. Ed, this idea that you can cultivate the perfect family, the perfect community. This movie is saying that is absolutely impossible. And if you are going to do that, it's probably actually not for noble reasons.
Right. Well, fiction is aspirational in a lot of ways. I think a lot of our aspirations in American culture, regards to the American dream, are founded on some sort of fiction.
Mm-hmm.
The movie certainly talks about that, and in no uncertain vocabulary. It is pretty much making its opinion known right from the start. When we see that big crane shot of Jerry, who was previously known as, what's his name?
Morrison.
Henry Morrison. We see Henry Morrison walking out the door of his home where he slaughtered his family. The movie says immediately right then that the suburbs are a place for monsters to hide. It is a particularly effective hiding place for someone who can put up an incredible facade and do horrible things. And we know this to be true. We know it to be true from reading the news. Where this movie, I think, differs from something like Serial Mom is the idea that the partnership between spouses in this household was never intended to be equal.
Yes.
This is based on the idea of the man being the breadwinner. And so Jerry will come in and will domineer this household. He is like a parasite that will come in to control the host.
He is, I hate to use this term, but it, I think, applies here. He is an embodiment of a social patriarchy.
Yes, he's basically a violent enforcement of an American ideal. He is that sort of mercurial idea made flesh. And I like that, again, that keeping him sort of dehumanized in a way makes him way more effective as a villain. Like, Serial Mom kind of does a similar thing where we're not really given any backstory for Beverly Sutphin, Kathleen Turner's character, but we get a sense of those people as humans, as fallible human beings. The stepfather, however, is just a monster.
Well, and something we mentioned in our Serial Mom episode is, and what's important to that movie, is that there is never a moment in Serial Mom where it ever comes across that Beverly would harm her family.
True.
Everything she does is for her family. The stepfather is the inverse of that, where the first time anything breaks down and doesn't work, it is because his family is not adhering to his impossibly strict moral code. And as soon as that happens, he's got to reset and start again. And resetting for him means completely wiping them out. And that is so terrifying.
Well, and the fact that he can do it over and over and over again, I also think kind of speaks to a societal mistrust of men.
Well, and especially how disposable men view women in these kind of hierarchies.
Yes, and we've all heard stories about how men have gone on to have second families and secret families and have started new families. And, it's I think it's an idea that scares us about men, where we value the idea of the nuclear family and that family unit bonding for life and staying together for life. Even though we know that's kind of it's a fiction we aspire to. Why do we aspire to it? I don't know. But I think the fact that Serial Mom, The Stepfather, and particularly the movie Parents that we're going to do at the end of the month, these are all distinctly suburban movies. This could have been Suburbia month just as easily as it could have been Scary Parents month.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't intend that, and I definitely think when we reach the end of the month, that's something we'll have to reflect on.
Yeah, what does Suburbia say about parenthood and vice versa? Why are they so interrelated in American culture?
Yeah, and clearly they're a fertile ground for horror. That speaks to something. But I do think I'm very glad to always revisit this movie. I champion this movie every chance I can get because I think it's a lot better than it gets credit for. And I'm so glad. I mean, I was hoping that you would like it, Travis, but I'm so glad to hear that you liked it even more than I expected.
Oh, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Again, this is one of the best movies I've seen so far this year for GenreVision.
So yeah, if you haven't out there, see The Stepfather. It is genuinely worth your time. Well, let's go to the shelf where we pick a movie that might act as a good pairing or substitute for our main topic. And as always, we want to encourage you, loyal listeners, to go to GenreVision.com and comment on the post for this episode with your own shelf picks. Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf for The Stepfather?
This is a pretty easy pick that most of you, I think, will have seen, and it's Poltergeist. Poltergeist is essentially another suburban satire that states that the foundation of this American ideal is built on a lie. The lie in Poltergeist is that we moved all these bodies out of the cemeteries to allow for the expansion of the suburbs, when in reality...
You son of a bitch, you left the bodies and you only moved the headstones!
Well, and Poltergeist has an added bit of racial commentary to that about the history of American settlement.
Precisely.
Well, we talked pretty in depth about Poltergeist in our most recent extended currently consuming over on Patreon. So if you want to go check that out, patreon.com/GenreVision. Well, for my shelf pick... this might be an easy one if people know The Stepfather and who made it. But if you want another movie about a terrifying, murderous family member that's directed by Joseph Rubin and shot by the same DP, John Lindley, you should watch The Good Son. This is fascinating enough. We did not mention this in the episode, but Jerry likes to whistle Camptown races. That's his kind of theme, I guess you could say, his creepy theme. And at one point, Macaulay Culkin's character in The Good Son Whistle's Camptown Races, which I felt coming from the same director as The Stepfather, I'm like, this has to be a nod. The Good Son is a movie that I think was a victim of the time. It is not well reviewed. It is not well remembered. I've seen people call it absolutely terrible. It's a riff on The Bad Seed, which is a pretty good movie, in which Elijah Wood, at the beginning of the movie, his mom gets she has Star-Lord's mom cancer or something. So she dies in the very beginning of the movie. And he is going to go live with his uncle and aunt while his dad is off in like Tokyo making some business deal that's going to set them up for life. And his interactions mostly involve his cousin, played by Macaulay Culkin. And his cousin's a bit of a troublemaker, but they're having fun. And then Macaulay Culkin starts showing that he's a we need to talk about Kevin kid. This is a movie, it's absolutely gorgeous from a production standpoint. It's like The Stepfather. It's really well shot. This is, I think, exploring a different facet of American dreams, which is these people and the family that he's living with are very wealthy and oblivious to just how awful their son is. There's really bizarre stuff in the movie. Elijah Wood is convinced that his mother is going to reincarnate somehow, and he becomes convinced that Macaulay Culkin's mother is his mother reincarnated.
Bizarre.
It's odd. Like it's a weird movie, and it was very panned because this came, I think it's right. You know, Macaulay Culkin had done Home Alone, My Girl, and Home Alone 2. That's who he was. So The Good Son comes out and everybody is just like, no, this is awful. Like, I think Roger Ebert gave it like a half star and said it's, you know, awful, and kind of got on his moral high horse about it.
Now I gotta see it.
So I don't think it's a great movie, but it's way, way better than I had always kind of known about it. And I saw it as a kid, you know, and it was just the thing. It's like, well, we don't want our kids seeing this because there's horrible behavior they might imitate. And it's like, I don't think that's the movie's talking about kind of absentee. I don't want to say absentee parenting, but like this idea of like, oh, we have the perfect life and our wealth means our kids are totally fine.
If it's sort of that hands-off wealth approach of, you know, let the help raise the children kind of thing.
A little bit. I mean, it's not that direct, but it's definitely, it's there. It's worth it again, just to see. It's a really gorgeous looking movie for what it is. And Elijah Wood and Macaulay Culkin carry the movie. I mean, they really are the two leads, and they are very young. It's interesting. Like I say, I'm not trying to go to bat for it as like some misunderstood gem or anything, but I do think it's a lot better. And it's just weird that Joseph Rubin and his same DP from The Stepfather did this movie. And I'm like, I think he's interested in these themes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to see that from a child perspective. I think The Stepfather is way, way better, but The Good Son is worth checking out. And I'm sure people have, I would love to hear people's memories of this movie, because it seems to be one that even though it wasn't well received, people remember it. Let's do some currently consuming.
Num, 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 num.
Travis, what's been on your plate?
Really quickly, I'm going to follow up on something that you spoke about in our last extended currently consuming, available at patreon.com/GenreVision. I watched Leica's Missing Link. And something that I noticed about it that you didn't say about it was that this is basically an Indiana Jones movie with a few clever things inverted.
Yeah, it's got that old school adventure movie framework and I think tone as well.
Sure. I mean, the structure of it is just so Indiana Jones in a lot of ways. You know, you have an opening scene where the main adventurer character and his hired sidekick are off on some sort of dangerous adventure, and we never see the helping character again in the movie because he is attacked and nearly killed by the Loch Ness Monster in the opening of the film.
Well, and the movie directly riffs on the whole, and it's not like Indiana Jones originated this, but whenever they're traveling, you know, showing the map, you know, overlay and showing the lines of travel and stuff.
Yep.
It's absolutely taking inspiration from those movies.
And it's incredibly charming. It is about an academic pursuit That is the driving thrust of the story, is about a guy wanting to prove academically that something is true. And then there is this other force that claims to be equally academic, but really is just about supporting an outdated system. And that is Stephen Fry's character wanting to uphold the idea that man did not evolve from great apes.
Great villain.
Incredible design for him, too.
Oh, well, there's like a whole sequence where he's walking through their club and like every candle in the hallway he passes by whiffs out. And he's just talking about, this is going to upset the established order kind of stuff. And I'm like, I like where your head's at, movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very, very well done. And it was distributed by Annapurna. So like other Leica films, it's not quite your cutesy little kids movie. It's got some edges to it.
Yeah, I think it's the kind of kids movie I wish we could see more of. And it's like, it doesn't treat kids like they can't handle stuff. And that's whether it be peril or occasional language or content. Like it's not rubbing your face in, oh yeah, maturity kind of stuff. It's just like, no, kids are smart. Like give them some credit.
Sure. Yeah. It definitely trusts kids to be a little bit smarter and be a little bit more capable of handling the things that are happening in the movie. Even if they're just a little bit out of, what parents would consider an acceptable range. Mm-hmm. The action in this movie is so well directed that the movie, I think, merits a recommendation for that alone.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yep. So if you're looking for incredibly executed action, brilliant technical filmmaking, incredible character design, wonderful voice acting, it's actually my favorite Zach Galifianakis performance in like a decade.
Probably. He's very... I think he was not the original person for the role, if I remember correctly.
Oh, okay.
I think he might have been recast later. But it works. He's very good in the movie, and he's definitely the funniest I've seen him be in a film for a long time.
Very understated performance.
And it's sweet. Like you forget, it's like, yeah, one of the things that works about Zach Galifianakis as an actor is he can actually be endearing. I think that doesn't get utilized enough in his acting career. And it definitely pays some dividends in Missing Link.
Agreed. Anyway, that's all I've been currently consuming. What, sir, has been on your plate?
Well, I'm going to pick one movie, which was also shot by DP John Lindley. I did not intend that, but that was just a wonderful coincidence. This is Sneakers, directed by Phil Alden Robinson. This is a movie I've heard about my entire life and had no idea what it was about. All I knew was anybody who knew about it liked it. I never heard a bad word about this movie. And so I don't know how. I think I came across from a tweet by Albert Mueller. I can't remember exactly. I think that's what it was. And I was like, I'm going to watch this. I've always heard about it. I've always heard nothing but good things. I don't know what it's about. It is effectively a heist movie, but with kind of early 90s tech stuff. It's got an amazing cast. Robert Redford, Sidney Poitier, Ben Kingsley, Dan Aykroyd, David Strathairn, River Phoenix, Mary McDonnell. Like it's an incredible murderer's row of talent. I watched it, and my review of it was basically that I think it's a movie that should be in the Dad Movie Hall of Fame.
I get exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, and have you seen it before?
No,
but I meant that. I was like, I had to qualify. I was like, I mean this sincerely as a compliment. Like there's nothing wrong with a dad movie, but this is like an absolute hallmark for that kind of movie. It's like, it's got a perfect grasp on its tone, its characters. It's a great cast and a notable cast. The characters are really likable. It's about very competent people. It's basically a team of experts who have to solve a problem, which is a very dad movie thing.
Of course, yeah.
Which is why we liked heist movies. We like seeing professionals be competent and find something that challenges them and how they work around it. It's a very funny movie. There's quite a few comedic sequences. I wouldn't outright call it a comedy, though I think maybe it might have been sold a little bit that way. It's a pretty straightforward techie heist movie. And I won't spoil it, but the movie then turns on its head and kind of is about something.
Okay.
It's kind of about, because the movie starts off like in, I think, the late 60s or early 70s with Robert Redford and Ben Kingsley's characters hacking into all of this, financial institution stuff of like, oh, we've hacked into the RNC, the Republican National Committee, and they're gonna transfer funds to like a legalized marijuana fund, like, and of course they get caught and all this kind of stuff. And then the movie becomes it's kind of got a similar head on its shoulders in regards to, and let me explain this, Fight Club, and the whole, if we were able to wipe out everybody's data, like nothing's tactile anymore.
The clean slate.
Right. But
Sorry,
this is maybe the most educated and heartfelt riff on that idea that I've seen, where it's like, oh, like the argument is like, there's no real money anymore. Everything is just numbers in some data bank.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing, and that idea of like nothing, it's nothing tangible anymore. Everything is information. And if you can control that information and manipulate it to your will, you can change the world.
Somewhere, Richard Pryor's character from Superman 3 just perked up.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. It is heightened. I think there's some people that would buy into the believability. That's where it gets its dad movie thing, where it's like, it feels just believable enough and based just enough on things that really exist, but heightens it in a way that still feels accessible to a broad audience. And there's great stuff. I mean, Dan Aykroyd is basically playing himself because he's just a giant conspiracy nut.
That is him. Is he chain smoking in the movie?
I don't think so.
Oh,
and
damn.
He's not hawking any, Crystal Skull vodka.
Okay.
But
that was before Crystal Skull's time.
Sure. But no, I had a really good time. It was the perfect movie. Like, I wish I had like a recliner chair to go full dad, like with that movie, and just kick my feet up and be like, yeah, like this is a
Don't
good...
touch that lever, honey. That's Dad's lazy boy.
Yeah, right. I'm just like, yeah, and I just need a domestic beer in one hand, and the remote in the other, and I'd be like, I have become Dad, destroyer of movies. But no, Sneakers was a really good time. I totally get the love for that movie, and it's well earned. So if it's one that people haven't seen, check it out. I recommend it. Well, let's close things out with our
Comment of the week.
And we got one comment this week on our Serial Mom episode, but if we were only going to get one comment, this is the comment I wanted to get. This is from Mark P. And I'm going to read the whole comment because it's just too good. Mark P says, I love this site and I love what you guys do, especially in regard to what you touched upon with the comments on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I listen to podcasts and such at work, and so very often I have to turn them off because it just turns into ranting, or I realize they don't really want to talk about the subject but validate themselves. I have never felt that way listening to you guys. Even when you hate the film, you guys have become an oasis of considered and thoughtful film talk for me, which I have found hard to come by. I actually feel kind of bad that I'm not in a financial place to support you guys on Patreon at the moment, but when I get my ducks in a row, I will be. Thank you again, and thanks for putting up with my rather overwritten comments. Mark P., bring the overwritten comments on. You are a jewel.
Overwritten comments every week, Mark P. Please. That truly brightened my week. It was a crummy week otherwise, and I'm so pleased to know that we have listeners who appreciate what we do like this. It is it's definitely affirming. It's not like we do this for the adulation. We do this because we love to do it anyway. But my God, does that feel good?
It really,
Thank you, Mark P.
If there was ever a week we needed to hear that comment, it was this week. Thank you so much, Mark P. That means the world to us. And, just keep listening. And we hope we'll keep delivering you the show that you love. And that's going to wrap it up this week. Next week, we're going to be doing, I think, one of the very few animated films that we've done on the show. And that's going to be Coraline, a movie I only saw once. So I'm very, very excited to revisit it.
Same here. Yeah, it's a Neil Gaiman story, and I'm always excited to talk about those.
And this is the first Leica movie, right?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I believe it might be the only one directed by Henry Selick.
I think so. So yeah, I'm stoked. I have not, like I said, I've not seen it since my first viewing, so it's going to be very fresh, and I'm stoked. And I know there's a They Might Be Giants song in it, so that makes me very, very happy.
Yep.
All right, so we'll be back next week with more Scary Parents. As always, want to thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you next week.
Right here on GenreVision.